To sew a pair of pants, you need the front and back pants pieces, back yoke, waistband, with the front edge folded up with interfacing ironed on the back. Make sure you have a fly facing, zipper, pocket facings, fly flap, and 2 pocket bags, along with a belt loop that you can pre-press. The first step is to fold over the edge of your pocket facings and then stitch them in place. You just need a small seam allowance to capture the raw edge of the fabric. Be careful as you're stitching around the curve to not ripple the fabric. Once that stitching is complete, open up a pocket bag and then place it on the top. You'll then stitch around the curve, securing the facing to the pocket bag. This is the piece of fabric that you see on the top front of the pants inside the pocket. This stitching will not be seen. It will be hidden by the front of the pants. Repeat those processes for the other pocket bag, and then you'll have 2 pocket bags just like this. They are now ready to be attached to the fronts of the pants. Line up the pocket bag as you would see it, then open it up. You can then move the pocket bag to the front of the pants, putting the right sides together. Then flip the entire assembly over so you can see the pocket curve. Line up all your pieces and then stitch along this pocket curve. Once you're done stitching, trim your thread and then trim away the scrap fabric. This method allows you not to have your pieces lined up perfectly. Once you're finished trimming, fold the front of the pocket bag back to the inside of the pocket. Roll the seam so that the pocket bag is not visible from the front. Once you have that rolled and pressed, then stitch the top of the pocket bag to the front of the pants. Stitch right along the edge. Make sure none of the pocket bag is showing through the front. Trim your thread, then stitch again, top stitching right next to your other stitching. Make sure you don't catch the other part of the pocket bag. Trim your thread. Now you have a top stitch pocket. It will look like this. Repeat for the other side. Now we need to fold the pocket wrong sides together and then stitch the bottom of it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is to complete a French seam at the bottom of the pocket bag so no raw edges are exposed. Trim your thread, then turn the pocket bag inside out. Use your scissors or another pointy object to push out the point of the pocket bag. Roll the seam flat and then stitch it closed. Make sure to enclose the raw edge inside the French seam. This will finish the bottom of the pocket bag. Repeat for the other side. Now it's time to secure the side of the pocket bag to the side of the front of the pants. Line everything up and start at the top of the pocket bag, stitching the front of the pants to the pocket bag. Stitch to the bottom of the pocket bag. Now we need to secure the front of the pants to the top of the pocket bag. Back tack at the top, then end on the inner top stitching. Stitch along the top stitching for a bit, then leave your needle down, pivot, and then back tack again. You can also put a rivet in here, but back tacking makes a strong, secure pocket as well. Trim your thread. One pocket is complete. Repeat on the other side. Now we will sew the fly flap, fold it together, and then stitch the short side closed. Turn it inside out. Use your scissors to poke out the corner. And then top stitch along the folded edges. Now get the front of your pants and place the zipper upside down on the crotch seam. Stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance with the zipper face down. Stitch past the zipper stop. Then place the fly facing right on top of the zipper tape and stitch it down. For a more detailed video on installing a front fly into a pair of pants with a waistband, please see the link in the description. Once the stitching is complete, fold it out and then edge stitch along the side of the front of the pants. You can trim the bottom of the center seam and then fold it with the wrong side facing the top and stitch it in place. This is so you can make a flat felled seam in the center crotch. You can also skip this step if you're going to serge the edges and sew with a standard double stitched seam. Now I am lining up the center pieces and folding over the side with the pocket, the side with the fly facing, and then I'm stitching right along the edge of that, making sure to cover the previous stitching and the raw edge of the front pants piece. Make sure everything is flat and stitch up into the fly facing stitching. Stitch past the beginning of the stitching, then leave your needle down, pivot, stitch over, leave your needle down and pivot, and then stitch down, making sure to capture both edges of fabric. Now the center seam is complete. Now it's time to attach the fly facing to the zipper tape. Line everything up and then fold everything out. Grab the zipper tape and the fly facing together and hold firmly. Flip it over and then stitch right along the zipper tape, making sure not to catch the fly flap or any other of the pants pieces. Now everything is secure and in place. We need to sew the J-stitch. Double check everything. Make sure only the fly facing is underneath. Fold the fly flap out of the way. Mark where you want your J-stitch to go. Starting at the top, stitch straight down through the front of the pants and the fly facing. Gently curve around, meeting your previous stitching. Leave your needle down, pivot, stitch towards the center crotch a bit. Leave your needle down, pivot again, then stitch back up to the top of the front of the pants, following along the edge of your previous stitching. Now it's time to bar tack the fly facing and the fly flap together. Stitch through all layers. Trim your thread. We can also bar tack in the middle. Stitch through all layers. Now the front fly assembly is done. Now we need to assemble the back yoke pieces to the top of the back pants pieces. Line them up and put them wrong sides together. Stitch a large enough seam allowance to allow you to make a flat felled seam. Trim one side of the seam allowances. In this case, I'm trimming the seam allowance on the yoke piece. Roll the final seam allowance around the other, press and hold. Make sure everything is even and straight, and then stitch along the edge of that seam allowance to create the flat felled seam. Roll and press the seam as you are stitching. Repeat for the other side. Now we have both of our back pieces. Place them wrong sides together. Stitch with a 5/8 seam allowance to be able to flat fell the seam. Trim one of the seam allowances just like you did for the back yoke. Then roll the seam allowance around the raw edge of the other seam allowance. Stitch along the edge, folding the seam allowance as you go to make everything nice and straight. Make sure that the seams of your yokes line up. Now we are placing the pants as if they are together. Start at the bottom of one of the legs. So wrong sides are together. Then stitch a 5/8 seam allowance or a seam allowance long enough to flat fell the seam. If you are serging the edges of your pants first, then you can stitch at the seam allowance of your pattern and put the faces of the pants right sides together. Make sure the center back and the center front seams line up. Continue to stitch around. Then trim one of the seam allowances, and once again, roll the remaining seam allowances around the raw edge of the trimmed one. Then stitch, folding the seam allowance and keeping it straight as you go around. Make sure you're only sewing through the center seams. Now the inseam is complete. Fold the pants around so that they are inside out, and you can sew the side seams. In this particular case, the selvage is on the side seam, so no serging is necessary, but make sure you finish the raw edges of your pants. Start at the top, and then sew the side seams together. Now turn your pants right side out. It's time to attach the waistband. Make sure that you have one piece of the waistband folded over, and then attach it right side of waistband to wrong side of pants. To see how to fully attach the waistband, watch the zipper fly and waistband tutorial linked in the description. So all the way around, it's better to have too long of a waistband than too short of a waistband. Fold the waistband around, finish with buttons, and adjust to the length that you want. It's time to enjoy your pants.